So this will be quite a bridge-making exercise now. But I think the important thing is that one can look at these presentations as a kind of a doomsday scenario. So compounded complexity. How the hell can we wiggle out of it? But maybe we should focus much rather on what is the goal. What would actually be the ideal goal? NIMBY, ideology, political wrong incentives set aside. Like what's the goal? How would we get there? What is this design for resilience you mentioned? Like what would that look like, right? And then finally, can we achieve it? And this on a vector from getting more connected to uncoupling, right? We can actually uncouple. We can also all go back to the villages which do not exist anymore, right? So I think so. Maybe again, so the question parameters would be, what is that? What we actually would like to attain? How can we achieve it? What's this kind of mix between top-down framework, research available, bottom-up, active, agile actors, and is it achievable? And maybe I start with you, Reto. So you have a kind of an interesting career, right, which spans from biotechnology to engineering to being a kind of to running in sorts of your own company in China. Can you quickly tell us specifically what did you do in China with Swiss Waters? Who were your clients? And what are the challenges you saw and see now?
Well, China, I worked only in big cities. Big city wastewater treatment was the topic. We have been consultant, so we have not done the final design for the plants. You need your license for this. As engineering company, our goal was never to go to China and to open an engineering office and to build these plants. Actually, what we did, we shifted our knowledge to China. We were actually one generation ahead in Switzerland. So you have seen this phosphorus mountain. So they are on top of this mountain at the moment. And they had to solve that problem to clean their water, to build up a sewer system that is consistent, that it really brings the water to the plant. And we did consultant there. What did we face there? I mean, we have much bigger cities than Switzerland, but they all came to Switzerland. They have seen that we were able to solve the problem. So they trusted us. They trusted to the solution we could offer there. And so we were not afraid to bring our knowledge to the Chinese, and then they take it over. It was actually the goal, so they could profit from what the experiences we bring them. And what was actually very nice, I mean, I have to be honest, we heard about democracy today, how important it is, but there they had to react fast. And so the system in China was able to actually react fast. And so they could see what is the solution, and they could do it the next day. Honestly, it was much fun. It was much fun also for our engineers in Switzerland to go and spend some weeks in China and to see what they were able to change, and how the reaction is, what they do. So the river, how it looked at the beginning and 2-3 years later, because they reacted fast and they built these sewer systems very fast according to how we explained them how to do that. And it was, we have to talk about how fast we can react, because the China was able to handle the problem much faster than we were actually able to do so. So that was, and we had never a problem actually with payment. They paid us well and they paid us quick, which is not an experience everybody had in China. Yeah, but meanwhile, to be honest, they do have the knowledge. So it was for us a 15-20 year peak, which now came down again.
I mean, we will have afterwards also a lecture exactly for that reason. If we are in a kind of a competition of systems, right? And our Western liberal system is, of course, needs to be measured against China. Again, all competitive in good spirits, of course, right? But we will hear afterwards what this could mean as a kind of a contrast to the conundrum we are in, of course. Now, to Anneliese, to the question, and please feel free to interject. I mean, this shouldn't be a kind of a question-answer session, right? But it's more really a discussion, but just to activate a bit. So if you could kind of define the ideal system from your point of view, I think you mentioned it, right? But I think on the other hand, of course, Switzerland is very much a country also which has a very strong belief and interest in solar and wind, in renewables, because we have this past of hydroelectrical power, which of course at the source of all of industrialization. Industrialization here happened in the mountain valleys where we had cheap energy and cheap labor. And now that in our DNA means we would like to kind of go back there. But what's your ideal system, and what do you see in terms of friction when you are presenting these kinds of ideas in a kind of a Swiss context?
Well, like if you look at the Swiss energy problem, right? So even just electricity, right? So we have a short-term issue, right? So we need more electricity now, right? Or in the next few years. And then we have a long-term issue because, in 20 years, the two large power plants in Switzerland go out of the grid, and this is all at once 17 terawatt hour, right? And so for me, this is clear, like in the short term, there is really no other solution other than solar and wind. But in the long term, if we want to do everything just with solar and wind, then it's going to be very tough. So my personal view is we have to combine everything that we have, and we have to start today. Because you see, the issue with nuclear, and the power plants were designed in the 70s to last 40 years. But then in reality, they were over-designed, so then the calculation tool improved, so we could calculate the safety margin better, the materials of the fuel improved, and then the life was extended, from 40 to 60. That gave 20 years free time to the politics to do something else. Now we are extending from 60 to 80. And then we can, chat, for another 20 years, right? But then there will come a time where, this 20 years extension is no longer possible. And now either we thought 20 years in advance, and they said, okay, we start something, right? Or then, I don't know where we are going to be. We are seeing what's happening in Germany, right? So it's already the industrialization, energy prices the highest in Europe and things like this. So we have the example, right? And so this is actually for me why it's very difficult to understand, because when the Germans started 25 years ago, there was no data. There was this energy scenario that people think are prediction. They are not prediction. The energy scenario says if you have, by this data, so much solar installed, then it works. But it does not tell you how to install this solar in these 10 years or 20 years. It's a if, right? And this is actually why, in Germany, they did not know that. They didn't know better. There was no other data. California exactly the same. But now, after 25 years, we see what happens in California. We see what happened in Australia. We see what happens in Germany. How many other countries do we have to see? And this is actually, for me, it's really like this battle very silly, because there is, as I hope I showed, we need so much electricity that there is literally space for everybody.
Yeah, and as you said correctly, there's also the pull by private actors right now, right? I think the big tech giants, they will want to have the small nuclear reactors. So there will be a market for that, and they will happen quite quickly. Right?
You see, the first thing that they are doing, first in the history in the world, what these giants are doing, they are taking the old power plant that they had already been shut down, Palisade in Michigan and TMI and so on, and they are reopening them. Never happened before, they were closed because of economical reason, but they were not decommissioned. And then, 2-3 years later, now they are reopening. And, the first one happened, I said, okay, it's first of a kind, right? But now it's already 5, 6, because these are the low-hanging fruits, right? Because the plant is already there, right? And now, of course, they are investing in all these small modular reactors and so on.
So also in terms of adaptability, right? So, and maybe to share the question before we kind of really start the discussion. I mean, the internet was always a kind of a utopian dream. It started out, of course, by DARPA as a military exercise, very much based on resilience. On the idea that data packages can also move around different ways if one is knocked out. But then, of course, the internet was very much a utopian dream. It was supposed to bring us more connectivity, more social interaction, more innovation, more happiness. And it turns a bit into a nightmare recently, on the one hand in the cybersecurity space, which you mentioned, but also in the social media realm. So how much connectedness do we need, and what form of connectedness should that be? And should we not rethink?
Well, I mean, I think we would all be to some extent happier if we plugged ourselves out, right? And, go back to papers and, the banks are all kind of using safes. So, but I mean, it's a little bit difficult now to go back in time, I think. The internet, I think, one thing, and that goes back to my question on kind of who is there to guarantee our safety, right? I mean, we need to kind of make sure that this tool, this network, this connectivity, eventually is advancing our goals, advancing also humanity to kind of the place where we want to be, as opposed to harming us. And the balance is very, it's a thin line. It's very fragile. As I tried to say also in my introduction, there are no clear answers at the moment at cybersecurity. Whose job is it? When I tried to connect it to what these two professors said, is that, and engineers, of course, is that, you mentioned, Reto, that you open the tap and kind of fresh water comes out and we all take it for granted and it doesn't even cost us very much, right? I mean, are we going to be ever at a point where we can just kind of open a tap and kind of cybersecurity streams through and we're all protected? And so what is this tap going to be? Is it going to be a service? Is it going to be some kind of an insurance policy? So we're not there. We're very, very far from that. And technology is moving so fast that nobody really knows how that will look like.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly the point. So I think we now can jump onto a kind of a meta level, right? Because talking about resilience, because I think the point is, of course, out of the tap should not come cybersecurity, out of the tap should come connectedness, right? So you and I can talk together. But the question is, how do we system engineer this in a way that the design is inherently for resilience and not for a kind of volatility, right? Yeah. And so I think, and I think this is maybe a question, how much, because the same in energy, right? The same in water. Connectedness is a gift, but it's also a curse because we depend on it, right? And designing for resilience means that we are managing the connectedness we build, we enjoy, and we have. We manage that more cautiously, more carefully, and with more awareness, right? And this is very much the question, what do we want? If we say, we want to be connected as people. That's the first thing, right? Because we are social beings. The second question is, we want to be safe while we're connected. So we want spaces, and we want spaces with light, we want spaces with water, and we want spaces with information. So this is what we want. But how can we design this better? What would be images which we could work with? With Reto, I talked about centralization versus decentralization, and the idea that to some degree, water infrastructure has to be decentralized in parts in order to be less volatile. Can you expand on that so that we're trying to jump on a kind of a level beyond the disciplinary and get into the discussion of resilience, right? As a topic itself.
Well, when we talk about tap water, we have this decentralized system where we collect the water. I mean, we have let's take the case of Zurich. We have the Lake of Zurich, which is the main source. I myself, I live in Rifferswil. That's a small village outside Zurich, between Zurich and Zug, 1,000 inhabitants. And we do have our own water production. But however, we are connected to the water production of Zurich. So if there is any problem in Rifferswil, we still can get water from the lake. So the lake, in this case, is our big source in case of a problem. And we did have actually once a problem with the reservoir, and then we could not use our source anymore. So centralized is certainly one good solution. So we have backups. So we need backups. I mean, in most of the time we depend on our own water sources, and if there is a problem, we can go and order that in Zurich. And what do? We pay every year to Zurich a certain amount for that backup. So it's something like insurance, which covers the risk. When there is a problem in decentralized system, that we can get the other sources, and they are open for us.
And importantly, you are a cooperative, or what's your?
Good question. Actually, we are three villages together, and two of them are cooperative designed, and Rifferswil, it is the community itself. So the village Rifferswil, which owns the infrastructure. But Mettmenstetten and Kappel, there it is a cooperative, actually privately organized, which is historically grown.
I mean, what I wanted to get to actually is because you mentioned water services in the UK, for example, which have been famously privatized by Thatcher, which was a disaster, right? What I was actually found interesting is the idea that certain common goods, specifically locally bound ones, territorially bound, topographically bound ones, that they actually should not be private, but they should be commons of sorts and should be governed as such, right?
Actually, it is mostly like this, but there are nice examples to the other side. For example, the electricity production in Zug, the waterworks Zug. So there are, and those who really work, they have a very old tradition. So those come like these cooperatives also. They are 100 years old, and they were always something like. I have a share, and my neighbor has a share, and we all have a share. So it has something like also the waterworks Zug. A lot of people from Zug, they do have shares from the waterworks Zug. But this is probably the exception. When you today would say we shift water production to a private company, it probably would not go that way. It would be more the Thatcher way, and so. Yeah,
but I think maybe that's interesting that because it's an old system, it is actually embedded. It's embedded in a local structure, in a terrain, right? Yours is completely non-embedded. I mean, again, so that's the other extreme. That the internet, of course, is a kind of a basic infrastructure upheld by a lot of goodwill, which is crazy. With all of these Linux servers, which are still operational. So again, the old utopian dream still lives, but on that you have a mix of corporate interests on the one hand, and a lot of unknowable things on the other hand. So if you say, we see embeddedness as something good. Mm-hmm. We see the potential mayhem on the internet. How would you design for resilience in cyber if you could, with a magic wand, reinvent it?
I think first of all, generally speaking, I think people in nowadays, I mean, when you think about AI, quantum kind of connectivity, there's a fear about talking, people say, it's too technical for me. I can't, I don't understand cybersecurity. I don't understand AI. What we need to understand is that, we all have to start talking this lingo. So if we leave it to the techies or to the young ones or to, the experts, we're going to start making mistakes, and we're going to start clicking on the wrong links and on PDFs that are, compromised at our computers. So we have to. I think the kind of the first mind shift in this world is really about, or in this era is really about. It's not a world of techies and non-techies. We're all techies. Because we all have a phone, we're all plugged into the internet, so we need to understand what is going on and how we as the human beings are the weakest link in any, in a network, in a company, in a university. I mean, I can compromise my entire company if I click on the wrong link. So I'm responsible for my colleagues too.
Is that true?
Absolutely. This is absolutely.
But I mean, that's very hard. I mean, you cannot blame me because I clicked on an email.
Of course we can. Of course, but that's exactly the point. The 90% of attacks are coming from human error, and they come from phishing emails. And this is absolutely the case. This is why organizations are training employees not to make mistakes. So the point I want to make here is that we have to, it's almost like, I have 3 children. I have to try to catch up with the next generation. I have to catch up with kind of what is going on in the world and not try to hide behind the fact that, I'm older, I'm not going to get it ever. It's just not the case. The world is running very fast. So I think that's the first mind shift that we
But I think there are 2 problems. First of all, are we not all dopamine addicted end consumers? Problem number 1. And the problem number 2 is, getting TCP/IP protocol delivered to you is a bit like you having a party and every guest comes in a cardboard box, which is anonymously labeled, right?
Right.
And then you start unpacking the boxes, and you might have a thug in there, you might have a pedophile in there, you might have a friend in there, and you just don't know. It's just an incredibly stupid protocol.
Look, I mean,
a protocol designed for non-resilience, a protocol designed for anonymity and a lack of embeddedness. So I think cyber is maybe inherently badly designed.
Look,
it's not your fault, right?
Thankfully not. But look, I mean, if you look at the ETH, for example, there's a startup that came out of the ETH. I'm sure some of you have heard. The protocol or the network is called the Cyan, right? Network. Now they spun off with a company that is called Anapaya, and they're really trying to create kind of an alternative, safe networks for the banks, right? So the Swiss National Bank is plugged into that network, and the other banks are. So you see ways to kind of bypass the evil internet, and like you said, those evil protocols, and you see ways to kind of to innovate around it. But as you said, I mean, we are dependent on it, and we are dependent on the main network. What can we do now to avoid it? And so what we have to do very carefully is to educate ourselves, to educate our children, to understand the risks, to tell our children that when they play those Roblox or video games, there could be vulnerabilities. There could be somebody there talking to them who is, not decent. And so that's our way to kind of live, and then to try to regulate it. It's going to be very, very difficult. And that is before the quantum moment, right? Because the quantum moment, as we know it, will break encryption as we know it. So it's a very, very complex system to try to think about.
But again, I think we have a kind of a beautiful arc, right? The beautiful polarity between the embeddedness and the kind of the design for anonymity, which is, for disembeddedness, let's say. Again, not your fault, but your field of expertise. Do you want to just add something?
Well, my question is, we run that Waterworks Rifferswil. So tell me, what do you offer to that I sleep better?
To that?
That I sleep better.
That you sleep better.
So I mean, I have to rely on my employees who might click one day or they might
Absolutely.
not. But I think, of course, I can train them. But I think I'm an engineer. I expect actually a technical solution for that problem, and not education of my employees.
Look, so when you think of cybersecurity as a company, we call it kind of PPT, right? The people, the process, and the technology. So you're right that you want to find a technology, a solution that would solve that. But you have to think about the P and the P, right? So what are the people doing? So that's one element. Of
course.
What are the processes that are going to make you more cyber secure? Also, what is the architecture of your network that is that you have designed to make it more kind of robust? And eventually you will think about what is the technology, what is the solution? And there are many solutions. There are many ways to address and make you sleep better.
Where does the journey goes to? I mean, what do I have to expect in the next 10 years as how much money I have to put to the side for this?
Great.
But I think let's wrap this key question. What I would like to do is there's a microphone which will move around starting now. Think about some questions. I have a last question for Annalisa. So design for resilience, design for robustness. I think we have heard your analysis and critique, and also your insight. It's a factual insight, right? That decarbonized countries have a mix of renewables and nuclear. So they didn't phase out nuclear. That's the point, right? Because nuclear gives you stability. Now, so that's for sure one hint. You showed nuclear alternatives, like the heating device in Finland. Like the design for resilience. What would that mean in an energy grid, in an energy world, so to speak? And again, the microphone is running, so think, and I will see you while she's talking.
Well, yeah, like if you think about the energy grid, right, there is something very specific about the grid, and it's the fact that the electricity that you put in is always to be exactly balanced with the electricity that you take out, right? And now this balance, it was quite easy to do when you have power plants that you can switch on and off, like gas and coal and nuclear and hydro, what we call dispatchable, because you know what you can put in, right? And so then you can predict, what's going to be taken out, and then you can balance the power of the plants to match this. Now we have more and more weather-dependent electricity sources, right? And so this now makes the system more complicated because it's more difficult to predict. As a matter of fact, in this report I mentioned from May 2025, one of the lines was that we need a more precise weather forecast, which to me is also funny because, if there is one thing that will become more and more difficult with climate change is to forecast the weather, and we're already seeing, and so on. And so the thing is that, okay, so it's becoming more complex. The grid system, what it makes it even more complex now is we're going to put these inverters, many inverters, because now the household can not only take electricity, but also put electricity in the grid. And that is where now cybersecurity, becomes a huge thing. So now I'm not an expert, but I read the newspapers, right? And so, for example, a big thing that came about the inverters is that, mostly they come from China. And in some of them, they found some chips, some secret chips, right? So they can be controlled remotely, right? And so there was a big scandal that I read in the news. So that, this is not my field, but it was in Europe and in the US, right? And now you start thinking how do you make your grid resilient and secure if now you have a much more increasing complexity, right? And so this is actually also what needs to be balanced and investigated in advance, right? So that you're not surprised later and things like this, right? And so it's a complicated problem, right?
Maybe one point on China. So I don't know if you saw in the news yesterday, but the Chinese announced that they're plugging out any U.S. and Israeli cybersecurity products from their companies, from wherever. So imagine shutting off products like Palo Alto Networks, which is massive company, or Checkpoint, or all of those security products. That's it. It's almost like how the Europeans said a few years ago, okay, Kaspersky from Russia, it's out. We're done. But it's so you really see also the shift, exactly like you're saying. What technology do you trust, right? We're going back to the issue of trust and resilience. What do I trust? What am I only using Swiss cybersecurity products in Switzerland? But guess what? There are no Swiss cybersecurity products. There are barely any. They're very, very few if you compare them. So, the whole geopolitical question, especially in today's world, is becoming more and more complex. And Yeah, it's
Again, so the topics of connected diversity, which we enjoy, right? The problem of the volatility of those and the lack of trust. So this is all kind of, this is circulating through all the discussions when we talk about this urban resilience theme, right? And urban resilience is, of course, a very broad topic. It means how do we interact in this room? You know, how do we talk together in a civilized way without implants or bad ideas or etc. But I think good ideas we would like to hear. So if you have questions, actually, great.
Oh,
wow,
great.
1, 2, 3. So we go from right to left.
Good morning. Very interesting discussion, actually. So my name is Stefan Hirschi. I'm an independent advisor at the moment. Years of experience in the sustainability consulting space. There were several times mentioned things like security by design, or you can maybe frame it as resilience by design as well. My question would be, how do you all maybe see the responsibility of the ones being responsible for innovation and owning innovations, for example, large tech companies these days as well? Mm-hmm. And as well, for example, what does it mean when you think about quantum computing and stuff like that, which by design, you say, somehow creates these issues on top that we already have? The reason why I ask that, I'm sometimes a bit worried when I hear people like Sam Altman, OpenAI, ChatGPT, pushing out stuff, innovation, very good, good intentions, good use cases, but then somehow a year later comes back, hey, by the way, we have some issues there. And you policymakers, you need to solve them. So it's a bit of disconnect between innovators owning them and thereby as well the policymakers basically being forced to respond, but having little clue how to do that. So you another question, but I'm passionate.
Yeah. No, it's exactly what I was trying to point out. On the second point about the policymakers, we know they're reactive, right? They're always reacting. When there's a banking innovation, they react later, or a year or two. But when you react a year or two later to OpenAI, it's no longer relevant, right? And so I think regulators themselves will have to think very, very carefully, how do I stay on top of the changes? How do I write a regulation or a policy that's even relevant? Because by the time it's approved, it's really not relevant anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, the question you could also say, why is there not a kind of an FDA-like proposal or approach? You know, so basically, before you eat a medication as a patient, you know it has been tested. Before society eats OpenAI, it should maybe be tested. I mean, we all laugh around.
It's a fair concept in a slow-moving world. You're right. Let's wait. But nobody in Silicon Valley is waiting. Nobody in Tel Aviv is waiting. Nobody in Berlin is waiting. These guys, young 20, 30-year-old are running, raising billions of dollars. I mean, this is what we do, right? We invest in them. We're throwing money at them. You know, the higher they were in the army, the better, because just like you said, DARPA came out. You know, we're throwing billions at them in order for them to innovate and come with new ideas and to get our children all, So the speed is just out of control, right? And to the point you asked about quantum, right? I mean, look, quantum we are all experiencing now the AI moment, right? The AI moment was the moment where, wow, everything can be automated. Suddenly I can do things. But the AI moment, first of all, it created a massive increase in cyber attacks because suddenly all the cyber attackers are using AI. So you have AI on the attack, you have AI on the defense, so you have AI attacking AI. De facto, this is already happening. This is not science fiction. The quantum moment will be even a worse moment because it will break everything as we know it. The quantum computers will be so strong that they will break encryption. So what do you do then? What is Nestle doing now to prepare for the quantum moment, the post-quantum moment? I mean, I know I'm asking more questions than answering, but I want to make you understand how complex it is. By the way, I'm not an academic or a regulator, so I don't mind because I'm an investor. I'm very happy that there are no answers to all of this.
I think you're speaking truth, and I think I really enjoy that. From your point of view, of course, right?
It's a jungle.
Yeah. We have another question.
Yeah. Thanks very much. My name is Florian Roth. It's working right. Zurich University for Applied Sciences. A question to Ms. Manera. Thanks for your presentation. You talked about like this new generation of nuclear generators. I wonder if you could say a few words how you assess the resilience of these new technologies. I think in your presentation you also showed the National Risk Analysis of Switzerland by the Federal Office for Civil Protection, where the probability of a nuclear accident was, I think, like is rated one time in 3 million years. We estimate that is also debatable given like history of nuclear accidents. How do you see the probability and
The safety, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, like the safety, let's talk about this probability because it's important. So first of all, like the safety of the new power plant, right? So there has been a radical change in the safety philosophy. And this is the following. So we always knew of a very improbable accident, like for example, what happened in Fukushima. It's just the probability was very little, right? And in those times, so in the 70s, right, it was decided that, okay, this kind of accidents are very improbable, so they are not part of the design, so you don't have special safety system for those. But for this very improbable event, you would use the regular safety system designed for more probable accident and operator action. So that means that, for example, in our power plant existing now, in a case of a very improbable scenario, they would have half an hour time to react. With the new power plant design, which are already in operation, the new generation, so generation 3 and 4, the change in philosophy was also these very, very improbable scenarios are part of the design. So that in this case, you have a new layer of safety system designed just for this very improbable scenario, so that even if this improbable scenario happens, then nothing happens. So, like even if the core melt, then the radioactivity stays in the containment. And if you think about Fukushima, I'm going to say two things about Fukushima. First, it was a reactor from 1971 that remained exactly at the same state of 1971. Our reactor have been constantly upgraded, brought to the state of the art. Fukushima was never done, right? The second thing is why it happened, why Fukushima happened. So in Fukushima happened because the reactor was not upgraded, and at the same time they had the worst earthquake in the history of Japan and the worst tsunami in the history of Japan. Like more than 10,000 people. I mean, this is history. I mean, it's undeniable. This is the worst ever measured in the history of Japan, tsunami and earthquake. And however, right, if in the place of Fukushima there would have been a reactor, one of the reactors that Japan is in operation since early 90s, nothing would have happened because these reactors already from the early 90s, they already have this more advanced safety system that would have supported this accident without issues. As a matter of fact, there was another reactor in Onagawa, which was actually closer to the epicentrum of the earthquake. So it had a stronger earthquake, and it saw also a stronger tsunami wave, but it was better protected. And not only nothing happened there, since everything was destroyed around the power plant, all the street, no electricity, and so on, the power plant was the safest place of all the neighborhood. And for 3 months, it became actually a refuge for 300 people that were living in the surrounding, right? And now, and this is the last thing I'm going to tell about reactors. Reactors have models. It's exactly like cars and planes. And the problem is when we hear about an accident, for example, in Fukushima or in Chernobyl, then we think all the other reactors can have the same. But it's not true. We have a models of Convoy, which is the German model, right? And then we have the ABWR, which is the Japanese model. And then we have so on, right? And the problem with nuclear is, and I'm going to make a parallel, just before COVID, there were 2 planes of Boeing MAX 737. They crashed. 400 people died. What did we do? Did we shut down all the planes? No, we shut down only this model. Then we looked what happened. We upgraded the plane, and now those planes are still flying, despite of the fact the only reason why these planes can fly is because of a software. Because from the engineering standpoint, these planes are not really good. because the lift for the aerodynamic of these planes is such that the plane tends to put the nose up, and so they need a software that puts the nose down, right? And the pilots did not know about this software. This is actually why the plane crashed, right? And now they corrected the software because the design of the plane is still the same. As a matter of fact, I always check that I'm not flying on such planes.
And what happens when the software is hacked?
Yeah, but what I want to say is that, with nuclear, there is always this thing, right? So, for example, Chernobyl accident, just due to physics, can never happen in reactor in Switzerland or this light water reactor. It's just by physics, right? And I think that this is also what we need to think about, to look at nuclear a little bit more rationally, right? When we compare one reactor type toward another one, right?
Maybe there's also a question at the back there. And then we have a question with the gentleman in the blue suit.
We have 5 minutes.
Yeah. So it's three quick questions and
my
quick
question is
answers.
very brief, and please a very brief answer. We might move into an imperialistic age. We don't know. Switzerland is too small to be a part of it, and it's probably too rich, so quite attractive for predators. How should we act?
Move faster.
Okay, that was a clear, short answer.
You asked for a short one.
And coalition building. I mean, I think we are topographically bound, right? But we have a question here.
Thank you. Diego Stocklin from the Hochschule Luzern. My question goes to resilient goals. What are the 2026 resilient goals in each of your industries, and how dependent are for other sectors? Thank you.
You mean goals like policy goals or?
There is a risk in the sector. What is your goal to respond to this risk that is dependent to other sectors? For example, electricity will depend on cyber protection, infrastructure will depend on electricity production. So I guess just interesting to link these commonalities that we have in Switzerland. Because I would agree that Switzerland is a small place, a perfect site for experimenting. And I think interdependencies would be the answer for resilience and sustainability.
Yeah, but already, as mentioned, right? So cybersecurity, for example, is a big topic in energy, right?
Yeah, in water, you said it already.
Not yet, actually. Not yet.
Well, I saw.
Didn't have any bad experiences so far. That's probably the reason why it's not yet a topic, but it's going to be a topic, I'm sure.
But I think there was a cyber attack. I think it was on Israeli water facilities. There is a history already. But of course,
but it was not on the newspaper in Switzerland. It has to be on
so that goes back to your point on interconnectivity. I think to your point also, information sharing is very important.
For me, this is really resilience means that we have to recover from a crisis, because we cannot really fully avoid it. I'm sure this unpredictable case always happens. I don't know why, but it does. So I think what's important is that we have to somehow recover from such an event. And that's the main goal of resilience, is, of course, to be prepared to avoid such a case, but even more important is what do we do if it happens?
That's a really
in water. It's so important. I mean, you have to survive. So every village, actually, in Switzerland, that's a regulation, has to have a plan. What happens if the water does not coming out of your tap anymore? And also my village, I'm council of that village. That's why I speak like this. I know what to do, which sources are still available in the case there is no electricity, nothing, no internet. People have to survive. They have to have water. And we have to know what to do if we have no internet for 2 months or something like that. What is going to happen then?
Well, I think that the beauty is that people can point to you and ask you, right, as a human being sitting there having the same problem, which is quite helpful. Are there more questions? Yeah? No, I think the microphone is there. We can then move it over, but then I think that's it.
Okay, we can, maybe
Yeah.
over the break if you're very quick.
Yeah, so quick, and then we have it.
Oh, I don't know. Perhaps not. Yvonne von Hunjus, hi, thank you. I'm just asking myself, isn't it the question how to integrate the risk in electricity, cyber security, and water, etc.? It must be possible to internalize the risk costs, and we can have a look at the financial sector, etc. It is complicated and complex to manage or to see the risks, but it must be possible. It shouldn't be a big problem, isn't it?
That's a good question, because I think the externalized risk of OpenAI is probably billions and billions. No? Yeah, but I think the misalignment of public and private interest. I think that's one thing we're discussing right now, right? So I think your question is brilliant, but I think hard to answer it more cleverly than that. You know, that's just not solved. And maybe there.
My name is Roman. I'm a service design master student looking at the collaboration on a municipal level between the industry and the public administration. And I would like to know, what style of discussion would you be looking for? Whom do you want to talk to on that local level to reach those goals? And how do you reach those people? Is it just C-levels? Is it project leads? Is it like, where does the impact really happen?
Good question.
Good
how-to question.
Yeah, one more good question. To whom we have to... Well, in general, we say it's the canton who has to organize that, because not every village can do it by themselves, to find these partners. To whom we have to address our question, or to whom we have to contact to get the right answers to our question.
Yeah, but maybe this resilience design will be kind of accompanied by a kind of a project management toolbox. I mean, you know, something you would have at your disposal, Ray, to know to who to talk to if you have particular questions, right? As a municipal councillor. So I think it's a good question that this process design is maybe something which needs to be thought ahead, right? It's
we have to raise these questions. It's because
Annalisa, you have a final answer to how to solve that. Who do you need to talk to?
Yeah, but as I mentioned, you know, like the problem of the energy system is that it's global, right? And then it you know, like you need top down. You know, like initiative bottom up is always good and so on, but at the end you need a top down coordination. Otherwise, you have this
Super.
fragmentation, right?
Hey, super. Thanks a lot. I think I close like this. We will have a discussion with a person afterwards who is more top-down than we are. It will be very interesting to hear what she has to say. Thanks a lot to the panel. Thanks for the questions.